Welcome to an improvised version of Souhan We are at O'Gara's Bar and Grill on Friday night, February 20th, 2 days before I go to spring training. No, I'm not excited about it at all.
Lucky bastard.
Yeah, we were going to do the show at 4:30 at O'Gara's. We had some technical difficulties, so we were just going to wing it now. With me is Bob Sansevere from 105.1 The Ticket, longtime St. Paul Pioneer Press writer and columnist. Now, I join Bob on his radio station, 105.1 The Ticket, 3:30 every weekday afternoon. And we're going to kick around some stuff about Adrian Peterson, Kevin Garnett, crazy, egomaniacal athletes, and we're going to talk horses and being a land baron. Bob's new phrase. My new phrase for Bob is a land baron. I'm Jim Souhan. The podcast is Unfiltered-Eps. You can find it at the website, Unfiltered-Eps, or on iHeartRadio. Thanks to O'Gara's for their sponsorship and their space. We appreciate it. Bob, let's get right to it. Most egomaniacal athlete you ever covered?
There's a few in there. As a matter of fact, one of them could be the one of the guys that is in the news. And Kevin Garnett's got an ego on him.
Oh, yeah.
And the thing that bothered me about him is, I've talked about the whole thing where he makes you wait 45 minutes or an hour. He showers, he goes in the back, he eats, he bullshits, and then he decides to come out and talk to the media. But the thing that bothered me the most was that little hand clap of talc that he did.
That always drove me crazy, too.
I always got poor Steve Ashburner never moved.
Right.
Because I would sit next to him, and he would spray that stuff. I even talked to the team doctor about that's not good for your eyes.
No.
Because that talcum powder, but that to me is the height of an egomaniac, too. He has no disregard for anyone else. He does it because it's funny. At somebody else's expense, that he could actually be blinding you. But as I think about it, I have to throw out a few. Another one, Robert Smith.
Yeah. We're in agreement there, too.
He was so condescending. And he also, when I was in, I had no idea what it was. In the fifth grade, we got report cards then. The teacher put on the back, Bob is a pseudo-intellect. I thought that was a compliment. I had no idea. Pseudo-intellect. Hey! Because she was saying, what are you so excited about? You called me a pseudo-intellect. You need to know what pseudo means. I would say Robert Smith was a pseudo-intellect. He wasn't nearly as bright as he gave himself credit for.
You just hit on a topic that I haven't talked about in years and that is very near and dear to my heart. Now, listen, first of all, Robert Smith is a very good football player. Very good football player. But the whole I'm too smart for the world around me was, as you said, complete bullshit. Now, here was the Robert Smith story. He wanted to pretend he was like above sports, that he was too smart to just be an athlete. Well, he went to Ohio State, one of the great football factories. Then he gets there and he pretends, football demands too much of my time. This should be an intellectual enterprise. Now, somebody can text me or email me or tweet me or something if I'm wrong, but I have no evidence he ever graduated from Ohio State.
I don't think he did.
I don't think he did.
He didn't when he came out.
I know,
but I don't think he went back.
No. So here's
he was going to be a scientist.
Here's a guy who pretended that, college athletics were beneath him because they were taking time away from his studies. And then he goes on to a very successful NFL career, makes all the money you could possibly want, and to our knowledge has never gone back and finished his degree. He tried to talk to us as if he was the next Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
And you know what? He was the next A.J. Hawk. That's all he was. He's a football player. He was a football player who played college football, who played in the NFL, and then guess what he did for his great intellectual post-career enterprise?
What we're doing, he's in the media.
He works for ESPN talking about football. Okay? And there's nothing wrong with that, but don't pretend you're better than that. That's exactly what you are and who you are.
But he jumps out, right? I'm trying to think. I'm going around the sports. I honestly don't know. Going back to I'm trying to think of Twins. None of them stand out as being egomaniacal. You were around them more because you covered them on a day-to-day basis for a while.
Well, you're bringing up a really interesting tangent here in that different sports produce different personalities, I think. Now, I'm sure there are some egomaniacal hockey players, but it's hard to think of them. I haven't found them. Gretzky was incredibly down-to-earth. Mario Lemieux was quiet but down-to-earth. Sidney Crosby, I know from people I know who know Sidney, when he seems aloof, it's not because he's being a jerk, it's because he doesn't want to be put ahead of his teammates. The wild guys have always been very easy to deal with, very down to earth. The Gopher hockey guys are always good to deal with. Hockey just does not produce many egomaniacs because it's such a team game, and these guys, a lot of them, grow up in small towns or farms and have to fight their way through the juniors, and they're never treated like a star until they become an NHL star, Then you have basketball that produces huge egos because one player can change everything. A star can change everything. It's like being in the movies. It's like if you have the star, everything else falls in around it. Football, I really think a lot of these guys are the big man in campus junior high. They're big man in campus high school. It's the most celebrated sport. It's the sport where, when they walk into a room, they're physically dominant. Then they, if they go in the NFL, they're in with a bunch of other type A guys. I think certain sports do produce egos, and football and basketball have to be at the top of the list.
Well, I mean, another one that comes to mind as you mentioned that about basketball, Stephon Marbury. There was an ego in him, and
yes.
When I think of Stephon Marbury, though, I cannot separate him from his mother and sister. Were you there the night they walked in late? I think they had on mink from head to toe. It had to be 3 different mink farms that contributed to these coats, because the Marbury women were not diminutive women.
No, they were not. That's a nice way to put it, Bob. I've already told
Very
you
nice women, I'm sure, but I mean, there had to be a few thousand mink that went into those stoles.
At the risk of repeating a story I've told before, but some people are new to the podcast, I'm going to go ahead and repeat my Stephon Marbury experience. It didn't even involve Stephon. I get assigned right after the Wolves draft Stephon to do a big Marbury story, to talk to the family and everything. So, I'm like trading texts and stuff with Marbury. Every time he answers the phone, he's like at a club or something like that, And so finally he sets me up to go out to Coney Island to visit his family. Now, they're still living in the projects. The projects in Coney Island. You're an East Coast guy, you know what it's like out there. So I take the train, whichever train it is, out to Coney Island from New York City. I get off and I'm wearing like a leather jacket, like white tennis shoes, and jeans. In other words, the stereotypical casting director wardrobe for a cop. I look like an off-duty cop. So I go walking into the projects, 3 huge projects all facing a central courtyard, right? And a bunch of guys are kind of hanging out. It looked like a scene from The Wire. It's a bunch of guys hanging out, not sure what they're doing. I walk in, somebody sees me, starts yelling, 5-0, 5-0, and everybody sprints. Everybody sprints away, and the courtyard empties out in like 3 seconds. Then I get to Marbury's building, and I walk up, however many flights, and I get up there, and I got the sense from the Marburys that they were just waiting for the big check. That Steph was going to get them out of the projects, and that's all they cared about.
Well, he got him into
and
mink.
He did. He got him into mink.
Heck of a job with that. As I'm thinking about this, Chris Carter, I mean, you and I have talked
Chris
about
Carter's an easy one, yeah.
That's an easy one. But I actually, 2 of the biggest egos I ever came across were not in Minnesota. It goes back to when I was in college. I did work for the college president, so I wrote news releases and I did interviews. There was no school paper. Do you know, does the name Don Bragg or Nick Workman ring a bell?
Vaguely, but I can't remember why.
Don Bragg was the last Olympic pole vault champion in 1960 to win with a steel pole. Then they went to the fiberglass ones. He had the biggest ego in anyone I've ever met. I mean, he saw himself as larger than life. He strutted around the way you see Schwarzenegger. The guy was put together. But, I mean, everything was wow. I mean, everything was big, and he just had such an incredible opinion of himself, as did Nick Workman, who he hired to be his basketball coach. Nick Workman's claim to fame in the early 60s, he led Seton Hall in scoring 3 years in a row. As a junior, he was the leading scorer in the nation. He was second as a sophomore, led the nation. I think he was third as a senior. Every year except for the year that he won the scoring championship in the D1 schools, he scored over 30 points a game. But his ego was through the roof. They must have loved each other, Don Bragg and Nick Workman. But Workman, the great thing about him, first few years it was Stockton State College in Jersey. Now it's Richard Stockton. I think they're ranked like 15th in D3 now. He would schedule the Coast Guard Auxiliary, not the Coast Guard Academy, the auxiliary from like Wildwood, New Jersey. It's just guys who worked in the, they just happened to volunteer on weekends, and then they didn't have enough players. It was like, or maybe he'd schedule like a Y team and call it something else. Brothers of guys on the Stockton team, he would have play for the auxiliary. And he had a great record. I don't know how he was like 21-5, who he lost to, lose the 5, but that's how he built a program there, and he'd been there like 6 or 7 years. So, but those guys, and no one, if you wouldn't have known him, a lot of people, if you met these guys, you would just shake your head in disbelief that anyone could have egos like these two. One guy was still living from 1960, the other guy from his run at Seton Hall, leading teams. But that was my first experience with oversized egos. And honestly, and with the guys we mentioned, they pale by comparison with this Don Bragg.
That's funny.
You've never seen an ego on a guy. Okay, he went like what? 14 feet with a steel pole.
It's pretty good.
It was good with a steel pole.
Yeah.
He might have said he probably still holds the record for a steel pole, but still.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because there are two different kinds of arrogance or ego. There's the earned arrogance. Like Kevin Garnett has a huge ego, but he also earned it.
Yeah.
You know, he earned the right to at least act certain ways. Now, you don't want to see him demean other people, but he did earn the right to act like he's a big deal.
Let me just say this. You have to have an ego and arrogance to tell another player, Carmelo Anthony, that your wife smells like Honey Nut Cheerios. I mean, there's an ego in a guy like that.
But knowing KG, he did it to get in Melo's head to screw him up in the game. But that's pretty good.
And Lala, Melo's wife,
Yes.
claimed in her book, well, that never was said. Okay, Lala.
Yeah, that was said. And that's a little too specific to be
Yes.
something that's made up. But what I was going to say is there is the earned arrogance of certain stars that we've dealt, like Chris Carter and Kevin Garnett. They were egomaniacs, but they also were great. Then there are the guys who I've run across who are arrogant and you can't figure out why.
There's no talent.
No, it's like Sean Salisbury had a huge ego. He was a terrible player. Roberto Kelly, when he came to the Twins, acted like, well, I was the king of the Yankees, now I'm stuck with the Twins. Well, no, you're an extra outfielder that the Yankees didn't want anymore, and now you're lucky to be getting a check from the Twins. There have also been athletes across time that have had the ego without the accomplishment.
You know who had one, as you're mentioning that? Bernard Berrien.
Oh, that's a good one.
He had an
very
ego
good.
on him, and there was nothing to back it up.
Huge ego, and he's afraid to go over the middle, and it's amazing, too. I have this theory. I'm going on all these weird tangents today, but that's kind of the way my brain works. You know, we are all caught up in the sabermetrician movement. We're caught up in the advanced analytics movement. Well, but and I believe that like any good general manager will use advanced metrics to do due diligence. As it's part of the puzzle. It always should be part of the puzzle. But my pet theory is personality informs games and seasons and careers much more than statistical analysis. Let's for that example, Bernard Berrien. If Bernard Berrien had been a better guy, if he had ever connected with Brett Favre on any human level, if he had ever earned Brett Favre's trust, Brett Favre doesn't throw the interception in New Orleans. The reason Brett Favre forced that pass to Sidney Rice is because he didn't want to have to throw it to Bernard Berrien, who was wide open on the sideline. If Bernard Berrien had been a decent guy, Favre either throws it to Berrien or runs for the first down, Longwell kicks the field goal, Vikings go to the Super Bowl.
That's a very good possibility, but you're right. He was not a guy anyone could connect with.
No.
There was an arrogance there and an ego. Now I'm going to take it on a tangent because it's not these metrics, but combines going on.
Yep.
In Indianapolis, the tight ends and the offensive linemen went. Now Max Williams had the third best 40 time. Mm-hmm. I talked to him within a week. He went to California. He wanted to get sub 4.7, and he wanted to get 23. 220. They bench press 225. He wanted to do it 23 times. Well, he had a 4.9 his first run and a 4.78 his second. Yep. So he was in the 4.7. He didn't break it. He got only 17 bench presses. Now, he didn't hit what he wanted. But the thing about this goes back to George Young, who was the architect and GM of the Giants when they won their first 2 Super Bowls.
Yep.
There was an NFL meeting in Hawaii, and I sat with him in the pool, and he talked about he hated combines because it's nothing but short pants and T-shirts, and he's right. Look what the kid did in a game.
Yeah.
Who cares if he can't bench press more than 17 times or does a 4.78? I don't know how much he might have hurt himself. He certainly could have helped himself, but it doesn't make sense why they look at the footage of this kid catching a football against Iowa and what he did in the bowl game when he hurdled one guy and basically hurdled another guy and knocked him over with his knee.
Right. I think that the combine probably is useful in making sure that a player has enough athletic ability to play in the NFL. You know, if you're a cornerback and you can't break 5 in the 40, then you probably just can't play in the league. So I think it's good to make sure that guys can meet minimum standards. But once you get to a certain level of physical ability, you know, the ability to catch a pass that's thrown anywhere within a 15-foot radius is much more important than how many bench presses you can execute.
Well, and also, let's go to Teddy Bridgewater. What happened to this kid is unbelievable.
Yeah.
He had a great 70% completion percentage. He has a bad pro day, and he winds up going with the last pick of the first round because the Vikings move up. He never should have plummeted like that.
No. And
look at his footage.
It's funny, too, because, you know, and you look at the way he played for a lesser program and beat better programs with lesser talent around him while displaying everything people say they want to see out of an NFL prospect. Ability to move within a pocket, ability to keep eyes downfield, ability to make big plays, ability to move the chains, the ability to be accurate. He did all of that stuff. And I have a pet peeve now. Rick Spielman got up at the combine and was trying to be cute and said, well, thanks to the media for knocking Teddy Bridgewater down where we could take him at 32nd. Well, hold it. No.
Everybody, they knocked him down.
It was the NFL.
Yeah.
It was 31 NFL teams that passed on him. The media didn't pass on him. 31 NFL teams passed on him, Mr. Spielman.
You want to talk arrogance.
It's
an example.
It's funny because I really think Spielman is one of those people who is two completely different individuals. I think if you as I have, if you get a chance to just BS with him off to the side about his kids or high school sports, something like that, he's great. But, man, he gets the general manager hat on and he gets stiff, he gets uptight, and maybe a little arrogant.
Now, let me ask you, we talked some athletes. What about executives?
Ooh, that's
the
a good
GM,
one.
Now, David Kahn would be in the mix. He wasn't really here that long.
And, he wasn't... Boy, he's such an unusual case because he is the worst person in sports I've ever covered. In terms of inability to fulfill any of his responsibilities, because he didn't know anything about basketball, and he gets hired for all the wrong reasons as a business guy who's going to run this franchise. He's not a personnel guy, and yet then he decides not to hire a coach so he can make all the personnel decisions. Talk about egomania. He thought he was going to be the next Jerry West, and he didn't know anything about basketball. I remember he used to call me up a lot in the early days. He was trying to spin me, trying to get me on his side. So I'd rip him for something, and he'd call me the next day and want to talk. And one day he started trying to explain the triangle offense to me, and you could tell he was reading it off a program or something, right? And so I asked him a couple quick questions about the triangle. He couldn't answer them. He could only answer what was already written down in front of him. David Kahn was the worst executive and the most destructive executive I have ever been around. He destroyed them. He put them back 10 years.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. But he also, with the media, he had this
smarmy.
Attitude. It was smug and smarmy because he was in the media once. So he thought he knew every trick and what he needed to do.
The thing was, he was horseshit. He wasn't good at his job.
No, I read some of the stuff he wrote.
He wasn't good.
No. That was just why he probably got into something else.
Exactly.
The biggest ego to come through here was Norm Green.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one.
Did you deal with him at all?
Very briefly. I got here in '90, as you know, and I helped our team, Team Strib cover the run to in the Stanley Cup playoffs that the North Stars made with young Mike Badano. And so I was around Norm a little bit, but I really didn't write about him much.
Well, the thing I remember, there's a lot to remember about Norm. I mean, the whole Norm Green sucks and what he did by moving the team, but I don't do as good a job as I should, but I wouldn't even be paying notice to it. I check my nose hairs thanks to Norm Green. I was talking to him once, and he had a 3-incher that every time he talked, the thing would just start...
We're still talking nose hairs, right?
Nose hairs. Okay. Yeah, every time he talked, the thing would flutter. So I thought, I got to keep an eye on my nose hairs because this is bad.
Wow.
I mean, how does someone not say, Norm, give it a pluck?
Because
pull that thing out.
He surrounded himself with yes men, even yes nose hair men.
Yeah,
good Lord.
But he was the ego on this guy.
That's a good one.
He strutted.
That's a good one. Because I'm trying to think of others. Kahn's an obvious one.
There's nobody with the Twins that I could think of.
No, the Twins have always been really pretty down to earth.
Although, now, I've had no issue with Jim. But
Jim Pollard?
Yeah, Bob, I understand that might have a little bit of an ego on him. Now, Bob's the banker, and then there's the other brother, Bill, who's the
arty guy. Or he's the
guy who's
film
the movie
guy. Yeah.
But I think if there's an ego on the 3, it's Bob that has it.
My sense, having dealt with them I have never really dealt with Bill, but Bill seems like he is exactly what he seems. He's artsy. He wants to be in the movie world, and he's good at it.
Haven't heard a bad thing about him.
No, I've never heard a bad thing about him. Bob, I dealt with a little bit. Because I went through a thing. During the I can't remember now. It was a lockout or a strike in '94. I ended up ripping Carl Pohlad for doing because of the lockout, we have to lay off some employees or cut their salary. But you're a billionaire, and baseball's going to bounce back. You're going to make your money. You're just screwing the little people because you can screw the little people, or to make some kind of silly point. So I hammered Carl, and I hammered on Christmas Day, and none of the Pohlads spoke to me for quite a while. Finally, I started talking to Bob. Bob might have an ego, but I also thought he was very sensible and very sharp. I actually got a good impression from him when he was talking.
Mine is not from first-hand experience.
Okay.
Mine is from what I've heard. I spent time. I did a long thing with Jim, and I actually like the guy. He just seems very introverted, and he doesn't want to put himself out there.
Right. I thought Bob would have been might have been the best of the three as far as handling the public relations aspect of it, but then he kind of tired of it.
He's also lucky that he has Dave St. Peter as a point man, as president of the team. That helps him.
Jim Pohlad, I think his flaw is that he's very introverted, that he doesn't present himself all that well in group settings, but I've never heard anything really bad about him from Twins employees. And usually, let's face it, in our business, Usually you hear the complaints about I hear all kinds of interesting things about Glenn Taylor. Oh, he's my boss, I can't say that. Never mind, strike that from the record.
Well, nobody held back on David Kahn.
Well,
he was universally
he was the worst.
Hated in
he was the worst. Because, Glenn Taylor has made good decisions, bad decisions. The bad decisions have been very costly, but you can also give him credit for saving the franchise, keeping it in Minnesota. You can understand why he would keep Kevin McHale around maybe a little too long, because Kevin's very charismatic and he's a legend in the basketball world. But hiring David Kahn is maybe the worst decision I've seen made in this market.
Now, I'm just going in my head, team by team, of the Mike Lynn had an ego and an arrogance.
Yeah,
but I liked
he was
the guy.
fun.
But he was fun. I really liked the guy.
He was engaging.
Roger Hedrick was in over his head, too. He was like David Kahn.
He was an empty suit.
He didn't know what he was. He showed up at training camp wearing the
coach's shirts.
The shirt and the whistle.
You know what? He was like Kahn without... The thing about Kahn was Kahn was also a lawyer, and Kahn wanted to outsmart you with everything. Kahn wanted to spin. Kahn had the lawyer's gift or curse of thinking he could take any sentence, break it down, and change the meaning of it while he was talking to you. Lawyers live in the gray area. How can I spin this so it's more favorable for my client or my case? Kahn tried to do that with everything, and after a while, it didn't take very long. You realize there was just no substance there. Hedrick might have been a decent boss in some of his stops. I don't think Kahn's ever been good at anything. Hedrick might have been good in the corporate world.
Burger King, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's great. Hedrick might have been good when he wasn't in the public eye, but he had no preparation for dealing with the public, being a public figure.
Well, quite honestly, since Mike Lynn, nobody running that team knows how to deal with the public.
No, that's a very good point.
Ziggy's the worst.
Terrible. Yeah, he absolutely is.
But I don't have issues with him. The current owners, I don't have issues with ego or arrogance with him.
Well, no,
he's just very wary of the media.
I think Ziggy is actually a pretty good owner. He's just not a good public figure.
No.
And that's okay. It's funny, because I used to have this argument with some other media colleagues, and they'd be like, Ziggy's the owner, he's got to speak to this, he's got to speak to that. And I'm like, he is making the best decision of his life not to speak to it. Let somebody else do it. I just wish, both in the Vikings and the NFL, there wasn't such a militaristic mentality where, only the general manager can speak to this, and only a coach can represent the team during They make it sound like communist Russia. It's a game. It's just a stinking game. I know it's an important game. I know it's meaningful. I know this is your livelihood, but Rob Brzezinski should be able to talk to the media. Yes. Rick Spielman should be able to talk to the media offhand during the season.
But he could, but he refuses to.
Yes.
That's his own mandate.
I know, but
Rob
I'm saying...
has basically been told not to talk.
Right, I'm saying all these people, it should be a more open society. You're a public entity. You're the most public entity in Minnesota. You don't need to hide behind couches every time a reporter walks in the room.
Now, let me add, because when we think of the Viking coaches now, if you were to ask me, was Denny Green egomaniacal and arrogant? I would say to a point, but I still haven't figured Denny out.
Well,
all these years later.
I used to have arguments with a lot of my coworkers about Denny, and one theory out there was that he was brilliant, and he just kind of said the silly things he said just to kind of tease the media and see how much they would swallow and see if they would actually take it wrong. Oh, Denny says they're going to work their plan and plan their work. That he was like this master satirist.
I don't buy that.
I don't buy it at all. I think, here's my insight into Denny, having covered him. One time, I'm on the road with the Vikings, and I'm in the team hotel. And I come down, and Denny's in like some off-lobby room. And this is after he'd found religion. And he's given this sermon to these people, this religious sermon to these Vikings fans. And he was giving it the James Brown fist pumps, and he was into it, and the modulation of his voice was what you would hear on a Sunday morning driving through the South on the radio. He was delivering a sermon. And you could tell that he'd get so carried away with the way his voice sounded and the way he was projecting, the way he was using body language, that he didn't know what the next sentence was going to be. So he had to make shit up as he went. He was making shit up as he went along, whatever sounded good. As long as the voice sounded good, he didn't really care what he's saying. I think that's the way it was with us and maybe even with his players. He knew what a football coach should sound like, but he sometimes forgot that you had to have some content mixed in there too.
See, one of the things I liked about that is I knew exactly where I stood with him, and he didn't like me.
Right.
And I wasn't crazy about him, because then it goes back to, and we talked about it in the last podcast, what he did to John Michaels and Tom Batta.
Right.
Took him down to the Senior Bowl
Yep.
and fired him there. But it was after he wrote his book, and we may have touched on this too, No Room for Crybabies, and I was asking him questions, and he did not want to talk about the book. Mm-hmm. And they were in Tampa Bay, and the best thing, and we still have a clip at KQ, we're going to talk about any more questions about Tampa Bay. You could count 30 seconds, not a single person piped up.
Yep.
But then afterward, I mean, now can we talk about it? We were screaming at each other.
Yeah.
And he kept saying, "You're just here to carry water for some." He felt that I was carrying water, as he put it, for Tom Bernard on the morning show. I carried my own water in that case. Because, Tom was never a fan of his.
Right.
But Tom's not, he's not a huge fan of a lot of coaches because he sees through a lot of them.
I liked what Denny did when he first got there. I liked the staff he put together. I didn't necessarily like him as a human. No, Solomon was the procurer.
Yeah.
The procurer. He was there for other reasons. But other than Richard Solomon, his first coaching staff was amazing. I mean, you had Brian Billick as like a quality control guy. You had Tony Dungy as defensive coordinator. You had Monty Kiffin as an inside linebackers coach. You had Willie Shaw, who would later be a defensive coordinator with the Raiders, as a secondary coach. You had Ty Willingham, who would become the Notre Dame coach, as a running backs coach. You had Mark Trestman on that staff. You had brilliant staff. But I felt like, first of all, I got along with Denny until he found out my newspaper was looking into all of his sordid off-the-field stuff. Then we didn't get along so well after that. But I thought he was a really good coach at first because he wanted to surround himself with great people. And then as soon as he started having success, he started wanting the credit. And so he didn't really want as many great people around him anymore, and that led to his downfall.
Well, and he wanted to have his own coaching tree.
Yep.
And Billick wound up winning a Super Bowl. Dungy won a Super Bowl. He had his tree.
That's true. Denny is one of those figures who I could tell you 10 positive things about him right now, and then I could immediately counter and tell you 10 really terrible things about him right now. He was that kind of a guy. That's Bob Sansevere. I'm Jim Souhan. We're at O'Gara's Bar and Grill on a Friday night. My band's going to play later in the shanty. My son's over there stuffing his face. We love O'Gara's. It's a really good food, really cool place to hang out. Bob's first time here. He's enjoying it.
I'm embarrassed to say yes, it is, and I love this place.
It's a cool place. Tomorrow, which is Saturday, February 21st, about 4 o'clock, after Michael Russo gets off the plane from Edmonton, Michael and I will do our podcast from the Alive and Social Network studios in South Minneapolis. That'll be available live or anytime later at SouhanUnfiltered.com. Sunday, I go to spring training. Going to do a series of podcasts from down there with Keith Twins officials, Torrey Hunter, Eddie Gordado, people like that. Going to be a blast. Let's get back to Adrian Peterson now. You and I talked about this on the radio, 105.1 The Ticket, where you do your show 2 to 4 every afternoon. I join you at 3:30. You were saying something off the air that we hadn't really brought up in our conversation before. I want to get into that.
Well, you mean when I call him honest AP?
Yes, explain.
He doesn't ever lie. This all
even
started,
when he should.
When he should. This all started because the authorities said, well, what happened with you and your kid? Well, I hit him with a switch.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was honest about it. He didn't lie. He told them everything. And then, but that's the first example. And then there was something came up right after that. People started looking to his foundation, and there was I don't remember what it was. It was a company. It was a thing. It was a name. Let's just say it was the Garden Club in Maryland. It wasn't called that, but say it's that. It was identified, and money was being funneled to this. Mm-hmm. Well, and they talked. No. Money wasn't going to the Garden Club in Maryland. It was going to the Garden Club in California. And the guy who used to be my finance director, he was running that. So basically he admitted that his finance director was funneling money into the Garden Club in California. He's made everyone know. And then we have this. He has to go to take a cut of whiz, because they want to do a blood test. Yeah, smoked a little weed. He tells them, and then there's this, the stuff that we had yesterday that, Well, I'm a little uneasy. And everything he says, I don't think he can lie. He's honest AP, like Honest Abe. He will tell you, what he tells you is what he feels. I think he's holding back a little, though, when he said, my wife, if it was up to my wife, I wouldn't be coming back.